Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate the chance to come back to my question to the Minister of Housing from a couple weeks ago on the housing crisis in this country, and specifically those who are experiencing homelessness and living unsheltered. I'd ask the question because decades of underinvestment in both housing and mental health and addiction support are hitting my community hard. As one example of what this looks like, over the past several months, an encampment has grown downtown Kitchener to now upwards of 50 people living in tents in the downtown, and my community is reeling. Now, at the time, I was told the solution is the Reaching Home program. It's part of Canada's homelessness strategy. It supports the goals of the National Housing Strategy. And the aim is to reduce chronic homelessness by 50% by 2027-28. Well, just last summer, the Parliamentary Budget Officer reviewed that plan, and here's what he had to say about it. In his words, quote, "We project that in the absence of additional spending, the number of households in housing need would have increased to approximately 1.8 million households, with a $9.3 billion aggregate affordability gap by 2025-26. Turning back to my community, this seems like an example of the increase that the PBO was expecting. In 2018, there were 333 people experiencing homelessness in Waterloo Region. Fast forward to our most recent point in count study last fall, and it tripled. There are now over 1,000 people experiencing homelessness in Waterloo Region, 412 of which are living unsheltered, for example, in tents downtown. The rest are in emergency shelters, transitional housing. They might be the hidden homeless, or in an institution like a hospital or a domestic violence shelter. It's clear in my community and from the PBO's report and other communities across the country that these plans are not working. Now, we also need to be clear that the encampment downtown isn't only the result of insufficient federal funds for housing. It's mental health as well. Because despite using the right words, for example, we can all agree, I believe, that mental health is health. The reality is that the funding isn't there. In the last election campaign, the governing party promised billions in a new Canada mental health transfer to the provinces. When it came time to the 2022 budget, though, there wasn't a cent budgeted for this transfer. Instead, it got a 3-line mention. Stay tuned for more. Well, the fact is that we can't expect municipalities to take on the housing and mental health crises on their own. They need support from the provinces and, yes, the federal government as well. And so I appreciate that the Parliamentary Secretary is with us this evening. She's a person I respect. I wonder if she'd be willing to join me to meet people at the encampment downtown Kitchener, and most importantly, if she can share, will the federal government step up, and if so, what will that look like? Thank you.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Housing and Diversity and Inclusion.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague from Kitchener Centre for his question and for his concern that I share for the people in his community who are experiencing homelessness. We believe that all Canadians deserve to have a roof over their head with dignity, but there's much work to be done to achieve this. Some 35,000 people experience homelessness on any given night across the country. That's why we developed Canada's first national housing strategy using a human rights-based approach. This comprehensive 10-year plan, backed by more than $72 billion in investments, prioritizes the people made vulnerable, the most vulnerable in our society. Over the past 2 years, these people have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. During that time, we've increased the number of projects that serve them through the National Housing Strategy. Now, through Budget 2022, we can soon launch measures that will benefit them even more. For example, the Rapid Housing Initiative is a highly successful program that is helping thousands of vulnerable Canadians living in precarious housing in the context of the pandemic. $2.5 billion have been allocated to the program already to quickly create more than 10,000 new permanent units of affordable housing for those who need it most. Now, with this budget, we are proposing to provide another $1.5 billion over 2 years to extend the initiative. And that is in response to comments last year. The new funding is expected to create at least 6,000 new affordable housing units, with at least 25% of funding going towards women-focused housing projects. As my colleague from Kitchener Centre may know, 3 housing projects in his riding have already been made possible through the Rapid Housing Initiative. Together, they will create more than 70 units of permanent affordable housing for those who need it most. One of these projects is One Roof. It will soon be able to provide a safe place to call home for people experiencing homelessness, individuals with mental health or addiction issues, and Indigenous people. Madam Speaker, our government also remains committed to ending chronic homelessness through a program called Reaching Home, Canada's homelessness strategy. We have committed more than $3 billion to address homelessness, including doubling annual funding for 4 years in response to the pandemic. Now with Budget 2022, we will provide $562 million over 2 years to continue providing doubled annual funding for the program. We'll also support research on eliminating chronic homelessness and a new veteran homelessness program. Madam Speaker, our government is making deep, sustained investments in housing. We're leaving no stone unturned to make housing more affordable for Canadians. As my colleague Shirley knows, and as I'm sure he agrees, federal leadership and the major investments we've made in housing throughout the country through the housing strategy is one of the most significant investments that we've seen in 30 years. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the Parliamentary Secretary for her response. I think it's important to note it's true. The federal government isn't doing nothing. And organizations like One Roof are doing incredible work. The projects she mentioned are important projects that are benefiting people in my community every day. But what I think is also really critical for her to understand is that the trend is going the wrong direction. It's insufficient. It's not nothing, but it's insufficient. Specifically, as I mentioned, we tripled the number of unhoused individuals in my community in the last 3 years alone. This is the time when the governing party has had the opportunity to do more, and they haven't. And I'm sure this is not only in Kitchener that this is happening, but certainly, again, if she wants to come downtown and see people who are living in tents as a result. And so my question is the same. While I appreciate what's already been done, the Rapid Housing Initiative is important. I'd like to see her do far, far more. Thank you.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Once again, stable, affordable housing provides a sanctuary in times of uncertainty. We agree. We need to do more. And that's exactly the message we've sent in the Budget 2022, a budget focused on housing. At the heart of this budget is a commitment to housing, a commitment to fighting homelessness. And I'd like to reassure my colleague that if he invites me to visit his riding, it will be my pleasure to go and to meet his constituents.